The first thing I recommend is knowing clearly what your own values are and why. A lot of people have these generalized beliefs or beliefs that they've inherited from their family or their culture or their neighbors or friends or whomever, and haven't really even stopped to identify what their values actually are for themselves. So until we know that, I think it's really easy to get entangled in arguments and kind of starting to pit ourselves or someone against us or other people against one another. And it's unnecessary energy.
Today, we're going to be talking about how to deal with different political views, different religious views, and not get into a fight, but maybe we can coexist. Let's see what Leah Guy says. Hi, everybody. I am Sandy Weiner, and welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. And to support you on your journey to lasting love, I have written 3 books. My third book was just published in September 2024. It's called Love at Last: True Stories of Falling in Love Later in Life. I interviewed 18 couples, and I am telling their stories of how they met their partner, how old they were when they met, what obstacles they had to overcome, and some of the love lessons that they share with our readers. You can find all of my books on Amazon for Kindle or paperback. Before I bring on Leah, I want to invite you, if you're not already a member, to join Your Last First Date. It is my free Facebook group, and we are different from most of the groups out there in that we are, first of all, for women only, women over 40, but we also have 7 monitors who help me run this group. And that means that we review every single post to make sure that it fits our guidelines, which are extremely boundaried. And it's to really help us all grow on our journey to our last first date. So join us at Your Last First Date on Facebook. And now for my guest. What do you do when someone you're close to doesn't share your views on something important, like politics or religion? Well, my podcast guest, Leah Guy, can help. She's a spiritual teacher, a speaker, and an intuitive healing artist. The author of 3 books, including Overcoming Toxic Emotions, currently published in 4 languages. She also, if that wasn't enough, she has a one-woman show called The Light Night of the Soul. Leah integrates her personal triumphs over sexual abuse, addiction, anxiety, and eating disorders, along with more than 2 decades of experience in private practice, working with clients and organizations, and helping people transform their lives. Welcome to the podcast, Leah. Happy to have you here.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
We are talking about a very important topic, especially in today's political climate. As we're taping this, it's before the election here in the United States, the presidential election. It's heating up. There's a lot of differing opinions. There are opinions on the war in the Middle East. There are opinions about everything. And I think more than ever, we are really polarized. I remember during COVID, people, did you mask? Did you vaccinate? Can I go out with you? Are you my person? And I think people tend to put people in a box a lot and have difficulty having these conversations. So what do you recommend when it's a divisive topic like any of the ones I mentioned?
Well, that's a big, big question. So, because I think it depends on what the divisive topic is for starters. But the first thing I recommend is knowing clearly what your own values are and why. A lot of people have these generalized beliefs or beliefs that they've inherited from their family or their culture or their neighbors or friends or whomever, and haven't really even stopped to identify what their values actually are for themselves. So until we know that, I think it's really easy to get entangled in arguments and kind of starting to pit ourselves or someone against us or other people against one another. And it's unnecessary energy. When we can get really, really clear about what our values are, what's most important to us, and that we are staying connected to those values from our heart place, not from a place of defensiveness, victimness, retaliation, or anything like that, but these true, honest values. So that's where I would say to start.
Yeah, I love that. I teach boundaries and I teach communication skills as well. And it always starts with who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Know thyself, right? And know your personal values so
Yeah.
that it doesn't become a defensive conversation. It becomes, like you said, a heart-centered conversation. And we can be curious about each other's values instead of I'm right and you're wrong.
Right. I think the second big thing that shows up for all of us is learning how to not take things personally. And that's a real hard one because obviously we're living in a world where most things revolve around our perspective of self. And depending on, again, our clarity of who we are, our self confidence, and the kind of work that we've done on ourselves, it's very easy to take everything, not everything perhaps, but a lot of things that other people say or do personally, that it means something about who you are, that they have a different thought or a belief. And I think there's a maturity in having enough autonomy and space and those healthy boundaries, like you're talking about, and looking at all relationships from a place of seeing the other in their autonomy and not having it be personal to oneself. So that's a real big one.
That's huge. Yeah. I mean, it comes up especially in families where,
Yes.
oh my God, I can't believe they said this. And I'm so insulted. And how could they say this about me? And I mean, look, even in our business where we're publishing books and putting our word out there, you're going to get people who are going to say unkind things. And you have to develop a thick skin and not take everything to heart. So, what do you recommend in terms of those sensitive people who do take things personally? Is there an exercise or something that you can share to help?
Well, I don't think it's just sensitive people that take things personally.
Yeah.
I think it's a learned behavior that we have that it's I guess there's no reason we don't need to judge that behavior, but to see it as a learned behavior that we're somehow including other people's viewpoints and behaviors and so forth as this as information about who we are. So I think the work of again kind of seeing our own sense of self-worth, our own beliefs, our own values, our own integrity and boundaries as full and worthy in and of themselves so that we're not looking externally for any kind of validation or somehow taking other people's words even personally or their behaviors or actions or their own beliefs personally because when we feel confident and full with ourselves and we have that confidence and centeredness in us then we're more unshakable and we can feel we can continue to feel whole while in conversation with others who have a completely different system in their orbit. It doesn't sway me. It doesn't rock me off my center. It doesn't unground me. It doesn't create a value for me. There's nothing about it that is about me.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's a practice. It's definitely not
Yes.
something we can do overnight. And I remember when I started this work, and it was just like, it was a game changer. I mean, it just helps you to function in the world in a much more grounded way and not be triggered by everything and take everything to heart. But we talked about core values, and a lot of people have no idea what theirs are. And I remember in coaching school, one of the first exercises was define your core values.
Yeah.
And I'm like, nobody's ever asked me that before. I have no idea. And so we did a series of exercises. I would love to hear how you help people define their core values.
Yeah, well, I think again, I work individually with people and then I also work in group settings. So I think it's dependent on the person and or the group that I'm working with. But I like to separate the values from more personal, like interpersonal, intimate relationships, and then more like community, friendships, neighborhood, so forth, into work because otherwise, I think a lot of us have different values, for example, of who we live around, maybe a very different set of values in our neighborhood or our street, our community, in our city or whomever. Maybe a different value system than who we sleep with or who we spend our holidays with. So I like to get very specific and have people write lists, like very simple lists, or what are the top 5 things that come to mind. And now we maybe extend that to 10 if that those 5 were easy. What things drive you in your own life? Because we have to remember that we're mirrors. We're, the people that we interact with are mirrors of ourselves in many regards. And so we have to look at ourselves, like what initiates our behavior, what draws us towards. And when we start doing that, to your question before, I think that in and of itself is the practice of becoming more aware, more intentional every day of, am I living in my integrity? Am I reacting out of my core wounds and being triggered? Or am I in my conscious centered self in the moment now? So even this practice of establishing our values is a practice of learning how to hold the space for ourselves, if you will. So that's kind of the way I would do it, and get as specific and detailed. My belief is the clearer that we can be about anything, the kinder we are to other people, the kinder we are to ourselves, the more we have the ability to really own and claim the thing. Yeah, sometimes people, for example, spiritually, they'll talk about the universe. A lot of people talk about that way, and that's fine. I'm not judging that, but that's very different than talking about a specific angel or a specific guide or a specific God. And so the more specific that we get, the closer to home these things become. And so I'd say look at yourself and what drives you and what do you desire, in a day to day in these individual groups.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective to look at values based on not just your own personal values, but on how you show up in different parts of your life and with whom. And I think that's really interesting. I think that also it helps us to stay in check of how are we acting? Are we in integrity? I wrote a whole book on choices called Choice Points in Dating because I realized that so many people go unconscious in their lives in general, but in dating in particular, we don't even realize the choices we have and what they're based on. And once we become clear, and I see so many of my clients start out this way without that clarity, and then they are so other focused on pleasing somebody else instead of checking in with themselves on, does this work for me? Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/last first date to learn more and claim this offer. Our values also inform our boundaries. The things that we protect have to do with the things that are most important to us. And I think people don't always get that first step. And so I would love to hear your take on how to set and enforce boundaries. And again, that's a broad topic, but we could even do it around these tough conversations. Whatever, you can just choose to narrow down the focus here.
Well, I would say the first thing for sure is to remember that boundaries are for you. They're not about the other person. So a lot of people, I think, even with all the teachings that are out there, and you write about boundaries, and I do, and there's a lot of people who've written books and articles and so much about boundaries, and yet it's very common that we think of boundaries creating to keep people out. And I just want to remind us, encourage us that creating boundaries is to keep us in, to keep us within this created safe space that we know that we feel able, capable, safe to function. And we're giving that information to others so that they can love us better, so that they can learn how to respect and care for us. So that's the big one, you know. And when we're creating boundaries and thinking about what do I need to operate within this day or within this week for myself in the healthiest way possible, it becomes really easy to identify in a certain way. Oh, well, I need XYZ, or I need to go to bed at this time, or I need to take a half hour lunch break, or I need to only talk to this person once a week, or whatever things are. The challenge is recognizing one, our worth to do this, and two, withholding our boundaries. And the worth piece is critical, especially for those who are more codependent, as you know, or those who are the people pleasers, or those who have a low self-worth. It's challenging to not feel, or the challenges to not feel like we are hurting someone else by taking good care of ourselves. And that's not the energy that we come to this with. It's not about hurting someone else or putting someone in their place or being retaliatory or defensive or showing them. It's about taking really good care of ourselves. And when we're doing that, there is no intention of hurting anyone. And so that in of itself is a big practice for many people, of learning healthy boundaries to implement in order to function safely, healthily, repetitively in our lives, so that we meet our obligations and have peace.
Well said.
Mm.
I think that there are so many misunderstandings, like you said, about boundaries, that they're walls, that they're hurtful, that they keep people out, that they, it's my way or the highway, which is really not a boundary, that's a wall.
Right.
Those are big, like, defensive things that we do when we feel threatened by somebody else. And when we set boundaries that are to give people information, to say, this doesn't work for me, can I tell you what works better? Or here's what I need. But again, we have to know ourselves in order to set those boundaries, and more importantly, to enforce them, because so many people set a boundary, then they feel guilty, and then they don't enforce it. They kind of, I don't
Right.
want to. Yeah. So let's get to that step two. Like, okay, we've set a boundary and then we feel bad about it. Do you have any tips on how to stay true to your boundary?
Well, I think the reality is we're going to hurt someone potentially. And we're either going to hurt ourselves or hurt another person with that mentality. And it's amazing how often we will abandon ourselves for another. And so I think again, it goes back, continues to go back to claiming your worth and your self as a worthy, valued individual that has the rights to make choices for oneself that don't determine someone else's happiness. And so it is an ongoing practice for many of us. It's very challenging, but I think learning how to, I talk a lot about the inner child and reparenting, from that scope of work. Whether we look at as an inner child or our inner selves or our past selves, I don't care, but learning how to become witness to ourselves so that we can recognize our patterns and simply perhaps challenge ourselves with a different way, a different opportunity, with questions, with curiosity, with interest of, in other words, gaining a wider perspective. If I'm going to choose something for myself and then feel guilty, that energy and that feeling is accompanied by something. It's most of the time accompanied by information from our past. It's usually not accompanied by right here, right now, unless we are engaged with a person who is manipulative, who is maybe narcissistic, has their own challenges and is in this dance with a person and tries to make them feel guilty. But you and I know someone can't make you feel something, but if that is our pattern, we will do that. So if we have to step wider and have a different perspective so that we can see our patterns objectively when we are in ourselves in relationships. I mean, like you, I work with people. I've written books. And I still find myself in the heart of a relationship going, oh my God, I feel lost. I feel like I'm 5 years old. I feel like I've been doing this for 30 years. I don't know how to change. It's hard when we're in it. But when we can take some space and have a different perspective and or work with someone who can we can repeatedly share our patterns and behaviors with, that we trust, then we can start implementing a different kind of behavior. But it has to come from a place of worth and sturdiness within us. It has to come from a place of trust. And I think trust is one of the most foundational pieces of any of this work. And it's not about trusting someone else, it's about trusting ourselves. We have to learn to trust ourselves and to know that it is appropriate and it is good that when I take good care of myself and I know my values and I am not spending all of my energy trying to please others, but I am speaking my truth and I am doing that in a way for goodness and for growth and evolution and not retaliation or to hurt someone else, then I can trust that, yes, this relationship may change, but there will be a relationship within myself that is enhanced, and there will be other relationships that will foster this continued growth. So there is always risk of loss, separation, what we perceive as abandonment or rejection. But at some point, you're either going to lose yourself or you're going to allow the risk of losing the other. So that's to me why we do this work. It's why we learn how to be more present every day. It's why we learn how to build confidence. It's why we learn how, to know who we are and what we want to need and how to take care of our emotional needs. There's so much entangled in all this. It's
Yeah.
a lot.
So much. And I'm with you in terms of doing all the work and still going back to 5-year-old me.
Yeah.
It's the difference is that we have tools and that we know how to get back to the current me and the more, mature and confident me. But I think the greatest risk is not being vulnerable and not speaking up. And I mean, I've had clients hire me after starting a relationship and then they've already slept with the person. I had somebody call me recently. She had slept with him. She had been on, like, I don't know, two months of dates. They were pretty intimate, but she kept so much to herself because of her past. And she said he wants to come over tonight and talk, and I'm afraid he's going to break up with me. And I'm like, have you talked to him about exclusivity? Have you talked to him about what would make you feel safe? Have you talked? I mean, you can have a do-over. Like you jump in, you can still talk about, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have. I got caught up in the emotion of it, but it turned out that they did have a great conversation, and now they have exclusivity, and she feels safer. But because of her attachment style, because of her past, she was so afraid to bring up anything because it felt needy and it felt weak and it felt like it would push him away.
Mm-hmm.
And the greater risk was not having the conversation and living with that nervous system that was a mess.
Yes, right. And feeling unresolved for forever. That's not a good feeling. That's what I mean about who are we being loyal to? A lot of times we're more loyal to people outside of us than we are loyal to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of living, yes, it keeps us in survival mode. It keeps our nervous systems dysregulated. It keeps us up at night worrying because for me anyway, my belief is we all have expression that needs to come out. It's going to come out in words. It's going to come out in paint. It's going to come out in your home and your relationships. We're here to express ourselves. And when it doesn't come out, it's going to go in. And when it goes in, that managing of all of that expression and of your truth, it just wreaks havoc on our lives.
Yeah. And it's painful to watch the people we love go through that.
Yes.
So if people are listening and they want to learn, how can I accept myself more? How can I become more focused on what I need and love myself more so I can love others more. Do you have something you can share with our audience that can help them get started?
Something as in a tool, is that
A
what you mean?
tool, an exercise, something they can, like a daily practice.
Hmm. Well, so I have a course called Regaining Trust. I would definitely recommend people do that course. It's just 5 days. But in general, I think a very simple practice is to to bring up a question or two in your life. One of my favorite questions is, what would love do? What would love do? And my second favorite question, and it sounds so simple, but it's, how can I be good to myself right now? What would be good? What would it look like to be good to myself? That may mean something like take a nap in the middle of the day. That might mean allow myself time to journal or to go to bed extra early without any guilt. That might mean a million different things throughout the day. But when we can stop and, as if, whether you want to look at this like the inner child or in some other perspective, when we really love someone, whether that's a dog or a baby or a spouse or a grandmother or someone that we know how to be tender with because we don't have that threat or the fear of being left or abandoned or rejected, that's the kind of energy that we need to learn to bring to ourselves. And I can often get there with those two questions. What would love do here? How can I be gentler with myself and actually share love? And, how can I be kind to myself right now? And when we are acting from that place, it's amazing what happens internally. It's not just, oh, I'm doing this and it feels good. There's this internal shift that happens and it softens and it kind of de escalates. And instead of that conflict that we're used to, now we have this agreeable sense of ease and joy, maybe around the corner or peace or something. So I would use those two questions and learn how to trust ourselves. Definitely number one.
Yeah, those are great questions, and they're simple. And I love simple because we'll remember them,
Yes.
especially in times of fear or, feeling bad about ourselves, self-abandoning, self-loathing. Just to ask, what would love do, or what would it look like to be good to myself right now? I think for a lot of people, it's like, what do they want? What would make them happy? And that's the way that so many of us were raised, is to be responsible for other people's emotions. I mean, I have an aging mother who's 92, who she's done this throughout her life, but now that she's really becoming more fragile, she has said to me, I think my children should be doing more.
Mm,
And it's sort of a passive aggressive, what do you want me to do? I do a lot of things for her.
right.
And I also protect myself because I know that I can't abandon me to take
Mhm.
care of her.
Right.
And so it's not just your children who should be taking care of you. It's you who need to be taking care of you. It's outside people who need to be taking care of you. It's admitting I need help is a
Yeah.
good start, right?
Yes. Yes. That's a
Yeah.
big one with parental care. It's a really challenging time for many people, and mostly because of how to balance that one's personal boundaries and staying true to oneself and also loving and being generous and caring for another. It's very hard.
Yeah. But knowing like I can love you and I can also not drop everything the last minute when you knew you had a doctor's appointment for 2 weeks. I can help you if I know in advance, I can move some things around. So it's yes and
Yes.
it's right.
Right.
Um, so I'm going to ask you our final question that I
Okay.
ask all my guests. What are your final words of advice, Leah, for anyone who wants to go on their last first date?
I love that title of your show, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Um, and I was thinking about this before we got on here. I think this has probably been said by many people, many of your guests, but I have to go with showing up so authentically that you don't care if it's your last first date. Just completely being yourself. I think that would be my number one across the board.
That is such good advice. It's simple. Nobody actually said it in those words, so you are unique.
Okay.
um, but I mean, everybody says be yourself, but we don't really always know what that means. And I think that it's hard to totally be yourself with a stranger, especially if it's somebody you met on the internet and don't really know them until you're in front of them. But I have found, like when I started dating after my divorce, I was all them focused. I hope they accept me. I hope that I'm still vital enough and have worth because I didn't know myself and I didn't believe in myself at the time. And I would spend so long getting to know them before I'd actually meet them and give them 100 chances and hope they change, all the unhealthy behaviors. And as you evolve as a person, you don't go in with that attitude anymore. You go in, I hope I like them. I hope that it's a nice time. I'm going to be me. I'm going to get to know them. I'm going to pay attention to anything that feels off and I'm going to address it. And then I'm not going to be left with pick me, pick me. I hope
Right.
I'm worthy enough.
Actually, I thought of a better way to say it. Maybe we'll make it
Okay.
even more unique. You don't have anything to lose as long as you don't lose yourself.
Hmm.
So go in with that attitude because there's nothing to lose as long as you maintain your connection to yourself, right? I think that sums up everything we've kind of talked about today.
I love it. Yeah, it totally does. Yeah, don't lose yourself. Oh my God. We're going to have that tattooed somewhere because it's like,
Yeah.
it's so key. And it's like the more comfortable you become with who you are, and even these conversations that we talked about in the beginning, these divisive conversations, I have changed so much around what I believe because I started tuning into who am I?
Yes.
And even then, it's like just because you voted for somebody doesn't mean you are that person. You need to understand who people are. And once you understand yourself really well, it's much more easy to be open to who other people are and what they believe in.
Yes. Agreed.
Yeah, what a great conversation. Thank you, Leah. Can you give us one link where people can find you? I'll have everything else in the show notes.
Sure. My website, leahguy.com, LEAHGUY.com.
Great. And I know you have a free gift for people who sign up for your newsletter. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure, I'd love you to sign up. I don't inundate people with information in the newsletter, but if you sign up, you get an 18-minute audio, my voice recording, work off of the book Overcoming Toxic Emotions, and there's a self-love language quiz in there and some other information. People find it really helpful, so I'd love for you to do that.
Awesome. And go get the book, Overcoming
Yeah.
Toxic Emotions. Thank you so much, Leah, for coming on the show, sharing this really important information. And it is life changing if people can really incorporate these tools into their lives.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me and for the work that you do.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for listening. If you love our show, please share it with others. Follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Leave a great rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We always appreciate that and it helps more people find us. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.